The main theme of the third version of the frame is making things thicker and not making it heavier. So the overall profile of the frame is pretty much unchanged. The motor mount radiuses are increased in size again. The middle body section itself is widened by just a couple of millimeters to give a little more room for the electronics package in the middle. We've gone up to a 4mm base thickness instead of the 3mm, and we've gone through and cut it down in areas where it doesn't need it. So for instance, these long arms on the side are the most prone to bending. The very short stubby ones on the front are not nearly as bad, so they're cut down to the same thickness that they used to be. These are still 3mm on front, and just the side arms are the full 4mm. So we've got this kind of bar running across the middle to give it strength. The one through the center wasn't quite as critical. Like we need the stiffness there, and because we do have all of the bending forces from those arms, but we don't really need the full 4mm. So that's just chopped part way through, just to save weight on that center crossbar. The middle section of the frame seemed to also not be a problem, and so it's cut down just a little more. I think this is actually, if I check, that's 3mm. Yeah, so this is the same thickness as the previous version of the frame, and then the rear legs, which are just a little longer than the ones in the front, have a little extra material, not the full 4mm from the long side arms, but just enough to give it a little more stiffness there in the back. All the regular features that we added in the previous one are still there. The tail and the cam mount are unchanged, although there are, you can see they're cut down to the same thickness, so that they were previously. Also, the heatsink pads are gone. That was just a complete failure. So we saved that weight, cut it completely flat, and leave that center section just nice and simple, and then we'll figure another way to deal with that. And then also here on the inner sides, where the Velcro straps go, these are cut down even thinner than the 3mm sides, because honestly there isn't a lot of force that's in that, so they don't need to be quite as thick. That's just to hold the battery on, and it's not a super big deal, so we save additional weight. Unfortunately, we've added a lot of material. We have added a lot of weight to this build. We're up to 49.3 grams, so we're up 4.9 grams from the previous version, but we really want to get that bending under control, and if this is what it's going to take, well, we'll just have to see. We have tons of power with the hex, so another 4 or 5 grams, we've resigned ourselves. This is going to be a heavier build because of the material, but it's not as bad as it could have been. We've put a lot of work into trying to keep the weight down, like all of these cutouts that I'm saying, where we really keep that extra material just where we really need it, and aren't wasting it. Could be quite a lot heavier if we just went with a normal kind of 2D, if we just cut that shape out of a thicker material. And the currently flying build of this frame, I did finally get that antenna mount nice and the thickness that it needs to be, so I've got that work. This works fantastic. This is super sturdy, puts no strain on the VTX at all. I usually have a third zip tie, but that's managed to pop off there, and in this case I'm just putting strain relief, because I don't have strain relief on the connection to my power lead, so I just have it tied off there to the antenna to strain relief the XT30 battery connector, and that works. This has just been really fantastic, and I love this setup. I am smashing these antennas a lot more now, so I'm looking at better solutions to deal with that, but they're not in too bad. Like even this, if it flies okay even with one of the lobes missing. It's not ideal, but it's not something that's going to end a session. And it's fairly easy with the zip tie straps. It's really simple to just cut them, pop it out solder a new antenna on when I'm repairing. This one has been smashed. I don't have a cover for this because of the slightly different size. This one's been smashed up pretty good. So the case on the FC doesn't hold itself together anymore, so that's why I've got the bigger zip tie. Here, this is just one with a field repair. I happen to have this in my bag to go around to keep the receiver on. I also have a bunch of extra wiring in this one because since this is the one I'm actively flying now, this is the one that I have my voltage telemetry sensor hooked up to. So I have the telemetry wiring in place for here, where in most of my other builds it's already been taken off. The camera pad built directly into the harness this time saves just a little bit of space and keeps the extra rat tail from the camera working. This has the full Mobius protector mount on it, so that's why this has got the huge roundabout. This is mainly here to protect from nose strikes and does a good job of keeping the ribbon cable from getting messed up in with concrete, and you know, obviously doesn't protect the entirety of the lens, but it keeps things from getting too aggressive. Like the lens isn't completely out there hanging in the breeze. If it gets smashed and pushed back on, this of course whole thing can slide back and help absorb some of that shock, and then these plastic bumpers are there to take the rest of the impact if needed. And this has worked okay. I really miss the size of the 808. The Mobius is kind of it's a bigger pain to get that camera in there, but for the extra resolution, it's kind of a toss-up. I kind of default with the Mobius because it's just a little easier to work with, easier to get spare parts for the ribbon cables and stuff like that, but it's just what it is. Still doing the frame grounding on this. You can see there's one of my ground points here for the rear ESC, and then the ones for the front, and have had no problems with that. This build is with 1407s, the 3800 kV, lots of great power, and the first build that I did with BL Heli S, this has got the Acon 30 amps. Although these motors test for higher efficiency than the 1306s, I actually had a lot of problems with sag on this build versus the 1806. Or the versus the 1306, where running the exact same batteries, I mean, these should have lower draw at the same, they've got the slightly lower kV and the more torque, so they're at about the same power level or thrust level. But it's not the motors that were doing it, because this was the first BL Heli S. These ESCs are a lot more aggressive on fast transitions, and so I was actually tripping my low voltage warning just because of the transition, kind of the transition power of this. And that's where you very commonly hear the set your start power to 0.125, and that made the huge difference with this, dropping the start power, keeping it from absolutely murdering the batteries every time it's got a quick change in throttle position. Which isn't just on the stick, but it's also like if, when you bump something and it tries to correct, you get a huge spin up, on the opposite side. So it's using the full power of these things even when you're flying very gently. So that made a huge difference, brings it back down, and I don't have as much sag problems on this build now that I've got that turned down. So it's just one of those little things. You'd think to blame the motor, but in this case, it happened to be the ESC, and then that's made this a lot more kind of generally flyable. Have had a lot of problems with these. You can see I've got a lot of these have had to be replaced a couple times. I had some just mysteriously die, like they were flying fine, landed, and then a week later went to power up, and they just were completely dead. And I don't know why. So I've replaced them a couple times. Not the happiest. I mean, I haven't had any blowout while flying, but I'm not the most impressed. to be honest, so I probably won't be using the Acons again. But in this case, just as a test, they work great, and they spin super smooth and super low, and I love that. My battery lead in the back, like I normally do with this setup. You can see the, you know, I'm not using the PDB. All of my wiring comes off the harness, and then of course the black goes to a central ground point right there. I have a lot of tiny rework in here. The battery for the Mobius, this one is using the smaller, let's see, where did I leave it? It's in the bottom. This one is using the smaller of the batteries that I use, and you can see it tucked in right there. This is a 75 milliamp 1S battery, and so I've got that, you know, into the normal battery position, battery plug there, and this is just taped to the base of the frame, and that keeps it alive for about 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. Again, just enough. Much better than the Super Cap, much lighter, and it's kind of a pricey battery to get from Mauser, but if you can find another supplier, this is really an ideal thing for the keep alive. I have a bit of a rework here on my 5 volts to get rid of the bulky USB connector. I'm just tied in to the power pins on there, and that's just epoxied down to keep it, and then I'm using a Pico Blade 5 volt power that leads up to, again, feeding off my Hawkeye, so this splices into my main 5 volt rail for all of the rest of the electronics. And that just simplifies the whole thing. Like, the USB is big and heavy and it has to dangle out, and this is a lot simpler to work with, but still leaves the USB working just fine, so I can still plug into it and use that. I don't have to disassemble the whole thing to get out, you know, to take out the SD card and stuff. So that works pretty good. You can see I've getting rid of the things. It works fine. I don't have any tape under there to keep the zip ties for the VTX, and this is in, you know, really securely, so this is not going anywhere. Even without, I don't have any VHB in between there. You know, I'm trying to get as much heat sinking as I can, so these just this 2 little straps works absolutely fantastic, and I don't have anything to get in the way. If I need to replace these, just snip it, pull it out, run new ones through, and that's super quick and easy. My little foam bits of foam crammed down here, trying to cover both the microphone on the Mobius, and down at the very, very bottom in this one, I have the little electric microphone on a bit of a wire extension, and so that just goes down. You can, yeah, there you can see it in there. So that just pushes down in there and gets crammed into the foam to keep the wind noise and prop wash noise down off that as well. So I'm using 1 bit of foam for both of that. Cell monitor, or cell telemetry sensor, that's just the normal FirstSky one standalone, doesn't depend on the flight controller, and so I much prefer that one. The big problem, of course, is the frame bending and how that stands up. Unfortunately, still not good enough. The cutouts have not been a problem. I still don't have any bending on the frame, so we're all perfectly fine on that, but I still have totally been able to bend these 4mm arms, so gonna have to keep working out the next version. This is still, of course, 6061. So the next step is going to be to cut the same thing out of 7075. So it's much higher, like braking strength should hopefully prevent the bending. That's what I am hoping to get out of it, at least. So we'll give that a shot. It's not as bad as it was in the earliest ones. Like, it's definitely still improving. I'm not wrapping arms up at crazy high angles, but it's definitely getting just enough of a tweak, when you get in a good hard crash, and not stuff going forward, like not so much, but like if you're up in the air and you drop out, and like when you fall on a motor like this, or you're spinning hard and get an edge impact, that's where it really causes problems. So it's not an every crash sort of thing. We're getting better, but still just isn't quite cutting it. So keep working on it. Still fun to fly though. Getting on the heavier side. This one is up to like 300 grams or so. Mobius doesn't help. The extra plastic for the things isn't great, but hopefully with the 7075 we can cut down a little bit more of the frame weight. We'll have more strength than we need with the material change, and so we'll be able to lighten the frame just a little bit more and simplify some of the stuff. So